Yeah, okay, go ahead.
All right. My name is Jonathan. I help lead informatics here at AMPATH, and I wanted to thank everyone for coming and for Kent to spending an hour with us to discuss Angular formally. There's a few various kind of parties here. It might be easier for everybody to just briefly introduce themselves so everyone knows each other.
Hi, my name is Leela. I am the developer here at AMPATH, and we have a group of other developers. I think we're going to go around the table and everybody's going to say their name. Yeah, next one.
Hi, I'm Emmanuel Nyachoke. I'm a new developer.
First day.
Hi.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alan, developer at AMPATH.
Yeah, that's Alan. I don't think you guys heard him.
Hi, I'm Duncan from the testament at AMPATH.
Hi, I'm Nikki, developer at AMPATH.
Hi, my name is Wafula Eric, AMPATH developer.
Burke, you want to go next?
Sure. My name's Burke Mamlin. I'm a developer turned doctor turned developer again. And well, actually, I'm kind of doing both, like JJ. I'm co-founder of OpenMRS and have been working with the Kenya project, I think, since the beginning. So.
Yeah, who is the next guy? Florence?
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
I can hear you. All right, so my name is Florence, and I'm studying in Chalmers, Gothenburg University, and we're new to this project, and we will be contributing to this project for us as a project in one of our calls that we're doing right now. No, not sure if that is enough.
Yeah, that's perfect. I apologize, but I don't know if we can control it from our side, but video is killing us for bandwidth. Will it affect your broadcast, Kent, if we have the video off, or is this just audio?
Yeah, like people won't be able to see you on the YouTube video later. We have somebody watching live right now, but that'll probably be fine. I'll probably leave my video on just because I expect to be talking a little bit more.
That's fine. Okay, so for Burke and Florence, if you don't mind turning off your video, I think it'll help us out a little bit.
Yeah.
Thanks. And Wes, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, sorry, Florence. Is there anybody else from your team there?
Joachim was here, but I'm not sure. He's no longer available. I cannot see him.
Okay. So just to recap, they're a group of master's students from Sweden, and they're participating on this OpenMRS Angular formally project. And Wes, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Wes Brown. I'm a developer on a project which is creating modules for hospital management on top of OpenMRS. So we've been working with OpenMRS for about the last 4 years or so.
Okay. And Kent, do you want to go last?
Sure, yeah, so my name is Kenzie Dodds, and I'm the author of Formally, Angular Formally, and I think that's why we're here.
Great, so let me just tell you a little background about AMPATH. AMPATH is a consortium of American and Canadian universities in partnership with Moi University, which is located in Eldoret, Kenya, Western Kenya. The partnership began about 30 years ago. And the primary purpose was to promote exchange between the various universities and to work with Moi, which at the time was just starting the second medical school in Kenya. In the early 2000s, the HIV epidemic hit here very hard, and that led towards a large care grant provided by USAID to support AMPATH in providing HIV care. We have scaled up dramatically. We are now in year 12, basically representing the third grant. but presently we take care of somewhere between 80 and 90,000 patients with HIV all over Western Kenya. And we also are moving into other diseases, chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension, as well as cancer. And then we also provide quite a bit of primary care services. During that initial scale-up in around 2004, there was a need for a data collection system to help us, I think, to do clinical care, but also to do reporting. And that led to the creation of OpenMRS, and really is the baby of Burke Mamlin and Paul Beyondich. More recently, I became involved with the project, and over the past few months, we have been working towards building a point-of-care tool for OpenMRS, customized for AMPATH. And you'll hear us call OpenMRS AMRS, which is what we call it here. We have been using paper for the past 10 years, so our workflow has been that. What's that? Our workflow has been that clinicians will, a patient will show up at a clinic, a form will be started, some triage data will be taken, the patient will carry that form with them to see the clinician, and then the clinician will fill out the form, and the form will eventually make its way to a data assistant to enter into OpenMRS. That workflow has many challenges associated with it, issues with data quality, data ownership, and so forth. So part of our efforts over this over these past few months has been to develop a point-of-care system, something that we call POC for short. And can you go back to that, just so I can see them? Something that we call POC for short, and we are just in the midst of kind of releasing a 0.3, piloting in a few sites right now, with the expectation of scaling this up to as many clinics as we can. So at least the 11 high-volume sites that we have, if not 30 clinics. Part of the kind of foundation of this initial effort has been to create a form entry tool, and that's where we discovered Angular formally and have adopted it and tried to use it to really form the basis of this POC tool that we're building. So with that introduction, I'm going to hand it over to our developer team to tell you a little bit more. Let me just tell you a little bit how I was thinking this call would go. I thought we could tell you a little bit about how we've adopted formally kind of our schema, some of the tools that we found useful, some of the things that we've incorporated into how we've built a schema on top of formally. And then I thought we could talk about some of the workarounds that the guys have come up with that might be helpful for you just to know about, Kent. And then to take any questions from you or tell you more about what we're doing. This is very flexible, but it's just kind of the initial thoughts that I had. Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
All right. So I'm going to hand it over to Eric, Eric and Willa, who will further discuss kind of how we've been using Formally.
Thank you, Kent. We have I'm not the only one who will be taking you through. Myself, Willa, and Nikki will take you through different sections of what we have. So ideally, as JJ has noted, that we adopted formally for what we are developing. So we kind of tried to map our paper forms and fit into how we could build that into formally. So the first step that we started is to think about how we would model our form so that it could fit into formally, and we came up with this thing called schema. So generally what our schema is a JSON document that tries to define what items or what questions are appearing on some of the forms that we modeled using using formally. So I can direct you to maybe a Google Doc so that to a Git repo, so that as we discuss this, you can just have a look of an example.
Yeah, I'm looking at your form1 JSON in the ng AMRS repo, but a Google Doc that kind of describes this would probably be helpful.
Sorry, there's no Google Doc that describes that. I just wanted to take, actually what I wanted is Git on GitHub so that you can see how we formatted that. So ideally, what the structure of this particular JSON, the first thing is just to identify.
Which file are you looking at? I don't see a link in the notes. Can you?
Yeah, I can put a link in the notes.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you.
And I'll add a link in the Hangouts for anybody who wants to take a look too. So in the Hangout comments, if you're watching, you can check out that.
Okay, so our schema is generally modeled into what we call pages. This is simply to represent exactly how our paper form looks like. So most of our paper forms have several pages, and then each and every page within a given paper form has got several sections. So we modeled it in a way that you have several pages, so that model has got several pages, and in each page you have a section. And the other things we are describing, when you get into a section, we have several questions that make up that particular section. So the other thing that goes into this particular schema, it makes is there is a service that we have written that will be able to read the schema and identify different types of questions within that particular schema and be able to convert it into a way that we will be able to render that. So there are some few custom types that we added in that I'll just try to mention. One is we have a custom type called provider. We also have our custom type called encounter type. So within the service, there's a way we are able to read those particular types and be able to convert them into different formally objects. Now, the other important thing, the reason why we also came up with this particular schema in this particular format, we kind of wanted that as much as we are modeling our form into a formally schema, we also wanted it in a way that we could easily generate a payload that could be captured or that could be served by OpenMRS. And you'll notice that if you pick any of the questions, the key things about these particular questions is the question will always have some type. It will have what we call a label that will be displayed, and then it has a concept. So ideally, the concept, and we're using a concept UUID, but ideally when we move forward, we can change that to something else. Now, this is a concept is simply a way OpenMRS is able to identify different questions on the form and different answers on that particular form. The other thing also that we added in within this particular schema is what we are calling validators, and we have written some functions that will pick up those particular validators and add it into the validator object of a formally type. So generally, that is the overview of our schema. You'll notice that it's slightly long, but ideally the basic thing here is that all these things are going into sections and they're organized into pages. Maybe just before I move on, is there any question you want to ask about the schema?
No, actually, I think it's pretty brilliant what you've been able to do because you're able to make it serializable to JSON and still have validators that are dynamic, and building abstractions on top of formally is something I see a lot and something that I think is a good idea. So yeah, I don't have any questions about it. I'm sure like if I had to start building forms using this schema, I'd probably have more questions for you, but I think you gave me a pretty good overview.
You can go ahead.
So just before I continue, so ideally what happens is we have written a service that will pick this particular schema, read through this particular schema, and generate a formally schema that would easily be rendered by formally. So generally the service that you have written will pick this and generate it into something that formally should be able to render. Now, the other thing that we adopted, so this schema generally, what the service does, it will pick this particular schema and convert it into formally using the formally tabs. Now, one challenge, and maybe this also came up in one of the formally issues, is that our form is slightly big. It has got several questions. So we kind of put it into tabs. But when these particular tabs are loading, if we were to load the entire set of the form, like a form could have 3, could have 6 or even 5 tabs, we notice that it would take, actually it takes a very long time to render the entire set of tabs that are on that particular form. So we adopted what we are calling lazy loading. So ideally, lazy loading is when this particular form is rendered, only the first tab will be displayed. So we did that so that the form could load slightly faster than it was loading initially. So the other forms will only be rendered when the user clicks on them. So as much as the schema, the formally schema is in the background, it will not be rendered until the user clicks on that. So that is another thing that maybe we wanted you to advise. Could there be a way that when we load these particular tabs, as much as the first tab is displayed, we could have these other tabs being loaded slowly by slowly, as much as the user is working on the first tab. Because one of the challenges we noticed that if you try to do that, formally does not allow you to maybe enter data or edit the form as long as that particular form is still being rendered.
I'm not sure I understand that last thing that you meant, that you said, that formally doesn't allow you to do what? Could you explain that?
I don't think it's formally. I just think that it's the browser. Basically, you load a whole bunch of fields at once, and the browser will only let you do that, and so the user is hanging for 60 seconds at least on the device.
Yeah, so that's a real problem with Angular and formally. So I'm pretty confident that formally actually is probably, it's definitely slower on initial render than if you just built the form yourself. Here, I'll turn my video on. Yeah, so it's a little bit slower than if you just built the form by hand yourself on the initial render, because it's doing some extra stuff. But I don't think that it's a lot slower, but I don't have any benchmarks for that, so yeah, that's anecdotal, I guess. But the part of the problem is just the way that Angular updates the DOM, and there's not a whole lot we can do about that when it comes to huge forms. There's just a lot of little tiny updates to the DOM as the form is being rendered initially. Yeah, performance is so the performance of an Angular formally form is actually really good after it's been rendered initially, because formally does a lot of things under the hood to make sure that what gets rendered has as few watchers as possible. But yeah, the initial render is something that still needs to be worked on, and the solution that you've come up with is exactly what I would recommend. Just using like ngIf or something, just don't render the fields that the user isn't looking at the time. Render them later. That's what I do in my app, and that's what lots of people have been doing. I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So Kent, basically what we are doing is we are rendering the tabs as the user is clicking on each and every tab. So you click on the first tab. No, I mean, ideally the first tab is rendered, and then when you click on the second tab, it's being rendered also. Then you click on the third tab. Then you go on until you go to the last tab. Now, what we would love to achieve is to be able to render the first tab, and then when the user is actually looking at the first tab, to actually kind of render the things in the background, so that when you click on the second tab, you don't have actually to render it at the moment when you're clicking. It's already rendered. Is it something that you can be achieved?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I could definitely see value in that, but as you described, the problem with that is while the other tabs are rendering, if the user's trying to type into an input field, they're not going to be able to. That's partially a problem with the fact that the browser is single-threaded, and so if JavaScript is taking up that thread, and that's not entirely accurate to say the browser is single-threaded, but JavaScript's running in the same thread that the UI is being interacted with, and so yeah, so as the form is rendering, if the user's in the middle of typing, they're not going to be able to type until that part of the form is finished rendering.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so we start with the approach we have chosen.
Yeah, basically. I wish that I had more, more to say, but I'm definitely open to ideas or contributions on how we can make Formally faster, because you're not the only ones experiencing this trouble. I'm actually experiencing it in my app. It's really frustrating. But in all the research that I've done and everything that I've tried, it just appears to be an Angular issue more than anything.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other issue that we have had I may say a lot of problems is validations, and more so validations on a multi checkbox. So initially we wanted that validations could be triggered anytime a value changes, and I think the main problem here is that our form kind of has got multiple nested forms. So you notice that if let's say you want to validate a value in a different section, and ideally when I'm talking about section, this is from Angular formally is what we call nested forms. So if you want to validate something based on something that is in a different section, you notice that formally does not trigger those particular validations if they are sitting in different sections. So we kind of had to do this manually. We don't know what you'd advise on that.
So yeah, good question. So the way that validation works is actually formally doesn't do any extra work for you for validations. All of that is happening with Angular. And so validation, by default, the way that Angular works is validation will run when an ng model changes. And so if you have two inputs and they're bound to different models and you have validation on both of them, changing the first input is not going to tell Angular to validate the second input. And so you would have to do that manually. So yeah, that's something that Angular formally doesn't do for you. But I feel like there's a mechanism that could probably help you that I implemented recently as an extra. Let me see if I can find it really quick. But there's something that you can say, yeah, validate on model change. Let me give you a link to the, this is part of the API check definition, and I'll stick this link in our show notes and in the Hangout comments. So what this does, this is part of the field options under extras, and so if you say validate on model change is true, then it will, Angular formally will run the validators for this field when the model changes, even if it's another field that's changing the model. So if they're bound to the same model, regardless of what form they're in or anything, as long as they're bound to the same model, then the validators will be run on this field anytime that model changes. So this is really useful in my use case because I have a MAC address and a line number, and those two need to be validated together for uniqueness. And so if somebody changes the MAC address and then changes the line number, that's when I need to run validation for uniqueness. and then if they go back and change the MAC address, I need to run validation for uniqueness again. So do you think that would solve your problem? Are your fields bound to the same model?
Not really, because of the having basically different formally forms. What formally does is that each form has its own model, and because of that, when a field in one model changes, then the validation in another model, basically different sections, they won't be triggered. So we had a workaround for that, and that involves using expression properties, because we noticed that expression properties are being triggered, or rather they're being fired when the value for the field changes. So we took advantage of that, and we are maintaining a list of related fields so that if one field changes, then the other fields are notified to revalidate.
Okay, so that's a reasonable approach. It's extra work, obviously, but I'm curious what you mean by formally creates its own model. Formally should just use the model that you're passing to it. Is that not happening?
Yeah, so I think what Nick is referring to, when we have these nested forms, so we kind of, when you have these several nested forms, so kind of when the changes happen in one model, it does not trigger revalidation in another model.
Right, that's the default behavior, but what I was mentioning with this extra property is you can tell formally to run validation on another field if that field's model changes, and what I mean by that is the model that you pass to formally, not the model that that field is representing, so the entire model.
Okay. Yeah, so that is, I think, a feature that would really help us, because ideally, whatever we did, we had to exploit the changes that Nikki has talked about.
The one problem you might come across with that is right now your solution will relate fields to each other, and so you'll only run validation for field A when field B changes. But by turning this setting on, you're going to validate field A when any other field changes. And so it's a little less fine-tuned. So depending on what that means for you, that your current solution may be preferable. And what I would recommend doing is, as part of your abstraction, and I don't know, maybe this is what you're doing, but as part of your abstraction, you'll want to have a like declaratively list the fields that are related, and then your abstraction can take care of setting up the expression properties to do that.
Okay, so thank you for that. The other thing that had that also on validation, and I think, I don't know if it's not really only validation, even its behavior is slightly weird, is the multi-checkbox. We are having cases where we are not able to validate it correctly, and other cases whereby you select an item, it kind of selects more than one item within that particular list. So those are kind of the issues that you've been having with the multi-checkbox. So we don't know if this is a formally bug, or maybe there is something you can advise on that.
Yeah, so I know that are you using the multi-checkbox from the bootstrap templates? Or
right.
The custom one?
No, from bootstrap templates.
Okay. Yeah, I've never, so personally I don't actually use the bootstrap templates. All of my templates are custom. And so if there are serious problems with them, all I have is the issues when people report those, and I get to them when I can. But I know that there has been trouble in the past with the multiple checkboxes and validation. That can be a little bit tricky. I feel like we addressed that in the issues a couple months ago. So I'm sorry, but can you explain exactly the issue that you're having with that?
Now, the first issue is where when you select one item, several items are selected on that particular multiple checklist. So that is one problem.
What's the problem?
That's odd. So you check a single item and they all get checked?
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should definitely not be happening. And I haven't seen anybody else mention that as a problem. I think probably the best thing to do, rather than belabor this on the call, is to go to the chat and let's see if we can figure out why that would possibly be happening. But actually, one thing I should say is definitely one thing that I advise against is having multiple NG models in a single template. This is supported by Formally, but the problem that you come across is lots of the template options like required and min and max and min length and max length placeholder, stuff like that gets applied to ng model elements. Those will be applied to all the ng model elements in the template unless you explicitly skip an ng model. And so like that can just be a little troublesome, and then some of the validation or some of the extra stuff that Formally does, it's supposed to work with multiple ng models, but it's not the default behavior, and it's just not what I recommend. So the solution is to create a custom directive that has takes a single ng model and internally will set the do $set view value on that ng model controller, and then internally it can use all the ng models it wants, but that way Formally only has to deal with a single ng model, and you can do validation on that model, and things become a lot easier in that scenario.
Right, so I'll just take us through how we did our validations. What we wanted in validations, as far as our forms is concerned, is we wanted a way to represent validations on the form schema. We wanted a very generic way, and probably a validation language that would enable us to write custom validations right on the schema. By the schema, I mean the form schema that we came up with. Yeah. So we had to write functions to support that, and basically what is happening is that the validation, first of all, relies on the ability to reference other questions, or rather other fields. For now, we are doing that at the model level. So the references between questions is actually happening at the model level, and then this validation language is actually converted into a JavaScript expression, and it's evaluated. So for that, we are taking advantage of the custom validations provided to us by Formally, and this actually works very well, and the validations that we're able to do is actually pretty powerful. So if you want to see the implementation that we did on validations, that will be in GitHub, and you can go to the forumstate validator service, and you can actually see what is going on there. So the other thing that we want to try and do as far as validation is concerned is to be able to do sections validations and also page validations. By that I mean validations that affect a particular section or validations that affect a particular page. Okay, so the one of the challenges that we are currently experiencing with our current implementation of validation is we have some fields that are being generated dynamically after the form has been rendered. So an example is the repeating section. Yeah. So the thing about that is that we have no way of referencing this dynamically generated fields, and because of that, we are still looking into this. But I don't know if Kent can advise us on that.
So you have that repeating section. Boy, that's one thing that keeps coming back to bite me is something that maybe we need to make like a real plugin for repeating section, because that's a really common use case. But for now, the example is hopefully mostly sufficient. So to make sure that I understand what you're saying correctly, the challenge that you're having is you have multiple repeating sections, and you need to reference all of the fields in any given section. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. But you can use these fields to do validations and all that.
I see. Okay, so what I would recommend is, as part of your abstraction, when you transform the fields, you can just tack on a reference to all of those fields at that time when you're converting from your schema into the formally configuration or the field configuration, and that way you'd have access to it on the options. So I would put it in the data property of any given field. So you just say the field.option or field.data.allFields equals all the fields that you have. So it will contain a self-reference, but that will be fine. And actually, I'm sure you have a question about that, but before I forget about this, did I hear you correctly that you were storing stuff in the model that was like contained part of the state of the form rather than just the model stuff?
No, I think, as you know, the model is automatically generated by Formly based on the keys and sections that you've provided. Mm-hmm. Now, for any existing data that we want to use, we are putting that in the data property for each and every field. Okay, awesome. I was going to mention also that you have the form state, which is shared across fields, and so like one example of a good use case for form state is if you have a checkbox that isn't actually saved to the model, but it's used to show or hide fields. So you'd say like add device or something. You click that checkbox and it shows additional fields. Then like that's the state of the form issue. It's not related to the model whatsoever. And so I think there's an example on the website for using form state to do that kind of thing. So if there's stuff that you want to have shared across forms, then you can have them share the same form state, and then having different forms relate to each other is pretty trivial in that way. And that's something that I do on a regular basis. So I don't know if that will help you in your current question at all.
Yeah, we'll definitely look into that.
Okay, let's see. So looks like we're done with the stuff we wanted to discuss, right? From this side. Yeah, well, yeah, I think what you wanted to do is to share what we've been doing, to trying to achieve, and the kind of workarounds we have implemented in order to do some of the things we want to do. And we have scheduled the call in such a way that we were expecting, after explaining what we've been doing, to get some questions from you, Kent. And this is the part where you can you can ask us questions if you have, and if you don't, maybe we can discuss of. I mean, some of the things we've already discussed, like we've discussed about the workaround, and we've seen you have advised us of how we can maybe improve or use a different way of doing some of the things. But I guess we can if we get the chance to look at the things, we can come up with better ways. So I would like to give you this opportunity to give us any questions you have regarding what we've been doing.
Yeah, so it sounds like most of what you've done is correct. And looking at your implementation, it looks solid. One question I did have is, actually, before I go further, what version of Angular formally are you using right now? I didn't see that.
7.2. Yeah, 7.1, version 7.1.
Okay, cool. So you're pretty recent. I think I can't remember exactly, but let me just look at the changelog really quick. But they're right around 7.1 or 7.11. Let's see. Yeah, 7.01 came with a pretty good performance boost, so I was going to recommend upgrading, but looks like you're there already. So I think actually we, well, yeah, we may have come up with a slight performance boost, but like I said, it's not measured in 7.2.1, so upgrade as soon as you can. But I did have another question about your abstraction. So there's a feature in Angular formally called fieldtransform, and basically a field transform is probably what your service is doing, which is taking your schema and converting it into something that formally can consume. And so fieldtransform basically does that. The first thing that formally will do, or a formally form controller does, is it takes your field configuration and runs it through all the field transforms. And you can have a field transform on globally as an extra on the field config or the formally config, or you can pass a field transform on the options for a specific field or form, and then you can have multiple field transforms because field transform can be an array, and that's like the old syntax is deprecated. The old API was where a field transform was a single function, but now it's an array of functions. So anyway, you might look into using field transform because that's the built-in solution for what your abstraction does. Honestly, like your abstraction sounds like it works just fine, so you may not really need it, but I thought I'd mention that. One other thing that I noticed about your implementation is you are using, let's see where, yeah, so for your custom input type, for example, I'll paste a link to this in the Hangout notes. So here you have an API check function, which is awesome. I think it's like I'm glad to see people actually using that because I think it's very valuable. But you're actually not returning that formally API check.shape, and so this actually is a no op. It doesn't do anything. You need to return the definition of your check. So what this formally API check.shape is doing is it's actually creating a checker, which is a function that will accept the options. And so and actually this also is not. Yeah, it looks like this is not valid anyway, because what you need to return is actually an object of checkers. And so there's an example on the website for using API check in the API, and so I recommend that you take a look at that. Let's see, I'm trying to think if I had any other questions or thoughts.
Yeah, you proceed, I ask you something about API.
What was that?
Yeah?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so since we are in the infant stage of using the Angular formally, and probably some of the things we were doing we didn't know we were not doing them right, especially this API check. So can you explain a little bit more about this API check thing? I mean,
Yeah,
I
sure. Yeah, so API check, I'm sure that you've seen, as you've been developing with Formally, you'll see that API check, or there's these warnings in the console that say, hey, you can't have this extra property foo, or you can't, like this is the wrong type, or something like that. So those warnings are coming from API check. And I created API. If you're familiar at all with React and React prop types, basically prop types is, so React is similar to Angular in one aspect is React has props where Angular directives have scope, so or a bind to controller, and so you can define like here are the attributes that I accept and here's how they're bound. So in React you have props. And one thing that's cool in React is you have these prop types which define the types that are to be used for this prop. So if somebody passes an attribute that's a string and it's supposed to be a number, then they'll get a warning. And so you can kind of guide your users of your components to use the component correctly. And so I really like this feature from React. And so I wanted to use it in my other projects. So I created an API check, which is basically a port of prop types to vanilla JavaScript, and now we're using it in Angular Formally, and it is kind of guiding users of Angular Formally to use Formally correctly. So if you say, Formally config set type, and you give it an object that has a property that isn't allowed on that object, then you're going to get a warning, and that says this isn't how you create a type. You can only specify these properties. So the bootstrap fields also have these checkers to define, hey, if you're going to use a label wrapper, you need to have a label, and that kind of thing. And so with you can also, with your custom types, define custom API. And so if you look at the example that I pasted, it basically we're creating a type called text with the name text, and it has a template that just is a div that references the template options.text content, and so that implies that whoever's using the text type is passing text content as a property of template options, and so that's implied to enforce that and to warn against not passing it, or passing in the implications. We can specify API check, which returns an object of checkers, and so we have our template options, and then our text content property in template options must be a string, is what it basically says. And so, yeah, you can do that with types and wrappers, and you can specify, you can create your own instance of API check, which is recommended because you can give it a name and a prefix and a suffix and extra stuff, and then you can specify that for a specific wrapper or type for the instance, or you can specify a global instance for Formally to use when checking your types and wrappers. So that's what an API check is. I recommend that you use it. It's very useful when you have teams of people, or even a single person using fields. It provides that runtime checking, which is useful. A word of caution: if you look at on the website, there's this production tips example, and I'll paste that in the various places where I'm pasting things right now. So obviously, having these runtime checkers is like a performance drain. It's not, it's not good to run these checkers when you're in production. There's no reason to double check that you're using things correctly. It's only useful when developing. And so in the production tips example, if you look at the HTML at the very top, I specify window.onProd as true, and this is something you do as part of a build process or something. And then right after you load API check, you'll want to disable API check globally. So you'll do that as soon as possible before it formally loads. So you say API check.globalconfig.disabled equals window.onProd. And so if we're on prod, we don't want API check to run. And that will save you a big headache from a performance standard or standpoint. And so actually, if you're not doing that already, then that has a significant, that'll make a significant impact for you by doing that. So I recommend that you do that. Then also you can disable warnings. That formally has a couple of custom calls to log.warn, and so I recommend that you disable those in production as well. So those are a couple of tips.
You want to say something, please? All right. Okay, thanks, Kent. So basically, we were getting questions from you, and it seems like. Can I say you don't have any more questions?
Yeah, I think you've answered all my questions. I think I have a basic understanding of how your implementation works. I think your implementation is good, and yeah, just a couple of tips of things that you can do to improve. Hopefully, it's helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for those tips, and I think we'll look into them and try to improve how we're doing things.
Yeah, Ken, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. I'm sure you get a lot of these requests, but know that your work has been extremely helpful to us here, and we're just in the very beginning of building our app, but we're hopeful that it'll have a giant impact on many people, and we thank you for making our job a little bit easier.
Thank you for that. That's why I do it, and it's good to hear that. I appreciate you allowing us to do this on a broadcast format, because you're right, I do get quite a few people asking for one-on-one help, and I can't do it all. And so being able to do it in a broadcast format like this, where other people can go listen or watch, is helpful, I think. So.
All right, unless there's any other questions either from you, or I don't know if there was any people that were listening in, we'll sign off.
Yeah, I think we have one person who's watching now, but I don't. I guess we do have the Q&A app, but nobody's asked any questions, so I think we're good.
Okay, great. Good to talk to you.
Okay, we'll see you around. Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.